Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And before we get started here this afternoon, I do have to advise you of something I think that has already you've been made aware of. That is, I had to replace juror number 10 because of a medical emergency. As many of you know, as she was walking out, she became faint and had to be eventually taken to the hospital. I don't think it's anything serious, but we want to take all precautions given light of the situation. So alternate number 1 is replacing juror number 10. Michael, you now become juror number 10. Our alternate number 2, Eugene, if you'd like, you can move down to the seat in front of you. Unless you feel you have a better view up there, that's fine. But we understand that you are alternate number 2 now, and everyone else moves up a notch in the order. I also just want to advise you that you should not infer anything from the circumstance that our juror number 10 had to be excused. Understandably, these things happen. That's why we have alternate jurors. So, again, I caution you just not to infer anything from that with respect to matters at issue in this particular case. So, that being said, then we did leave for the lunch break. After the state had concluded its opening statement, it is now time for the defense. For the defense opening statement, or closing statement. So, Mr. Parker, you may proceed in that regard.
Thank you very much. Please the court. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of my client, Mr. Sowell, my co-counsel, Mr. Sims, the prosecutor is absolutely right about Judge Abrams. He's done a fantastic job. You will not find a better judge in this courthouse, nor dare I say in the state of Ohio. And his staff, as you know, from personal experience, has been fantastic as well. And we're all very fortunate to have such an important, complex, and difficult case handled by such competent people. We shall be proud. You folks have sacrificed much. You were dragged out of your normal lives by getting a notice in the mail to come down and participate in our democracy and do your duty as jurors. And you answered that call. And of course, in answering that call, you had no idea which case you would eventually end up on. And this is the one you've ended up on. And you have served very honorably. We appreciate that. That cannot be stated enough. I am not going to go through each and every exhibit that was admitted or that was discussed. You folks will have all the exhibits back in the jury room. You need to go through them. You need to understand them. You will take the time that you deem necessary to understand them. I know you've paid close attention. I know that many of you have taken notes. So I'm not going to go through each and every item because I know that you have paid close attention. But you should, individually and as a group, go through the photographs, go through the trace evidence reports, go through the various exhibits that you need to go through so you have a full, complete understanding of the evidence that was presented in this case. One of your most difficult jobs is determining credibility. We talked about this at the very beginning of the case. And it's true in every case, but I think it's especially true in this case. Credibility. You have to determine the credibility of each and every witness that testified, whether it was the first witness or the last witness, and every witness in between. And I'm going to discuss some of the witnesses individually and try to point out some things I think you need to take into consideration in determining a person's credibility. That is, are they telling the truth? Are they telling the complete truth? Are they worthy of belief? Now, you've got the jury instructions. You heard them yesterday, very long, somewhat complicated as the law makes things, it seems like. But you have those written instructions. I encourage you to refer to them as you need to, because there are elements of crimes that the state has to prove each and every element. And there is a definition of what proof beyond a reasonable doubt is. And there's a part of that definition is what they call the most important of your own affairs. The most important of your own affairs. Keep that in mind as you're deliberating, as you're thinking about the case, as you're discussing the case. Do you have the type of evidence, the quality of evidence, to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt the various items that the state must prove? And let's start with talking about emotions. This case is filled with emotions. No question about it. We're all human. These are tragic, absolutely tragic stories that have been told in this program. Things that we wouldn't even think about in our normal lives, that you've been subjected to here. And emotions are part of the human condition, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when you're deciding whether the state has proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt or not, you have to put those motions in place. Yes, they're there, but with respect to the gruesome photos, we touched upon this in the jury selection process. Those photos are there for evidentiary value, if they have it. They're not there to stir your emotions, although they certainly will. They're not there to prejudice you or bias you in any way for or against any person, as they might. They are there for evidentiary value. So whatever human emotions you have, of course, you have them, but to do your duty, to follow your oath, you need to set those emotions aside and decide the case on the facts that were presented in this courtroom, if you can. Now, determining credibility. One of the most difficult things that you have to do. And I'm going to try to proceed initially through the witnesses as they were called concerning the underlying facts. There are a series of women who testified, 5 different women. Ms. Billups, Ms. Morris, Ms. Wade, Ms. Doss, Ms. Gibb. You have to determine their credibility. And you heard a lot of information about them and their lives and their background and their struggles. And those are things that you need to take into account in determining their credibility. And you heard about their addiction problems. You heard about how many of them had serious mental health issues. And I don't bring that up to embarrass them. I don't bring that up to belittle them or in any way. But it does affect their credibility, I suggest. And it's something that is fair for you to take into consideration when you're deciding whether they're being truthful. Did they see the things they said they saw? Did they experience the things as they said? These are fair considerations for you. So you're going to have to determine the credibility of these women. And there are other issues in the case, obviously. Probably the biggest, the most serious decision you have to make is whether the state has proven to you by evidence beyond a reasonable doubt whether the state proved the identity of the murderer, of the person who killed the 11 women whose bodies were found. Have they proven to you who actually killed them? No eyewitnesses? No fingerprints on any of the plastic bags, even though they tried? And there's none of the defendant's DNA linked, to any of the 11 homicide victims, nor the other. If somehow you decide that the state has proven the identity of the murderer, and if you decide it's Mr. Sowell, and I'm certainly not conceding that, and I'll address it later. But if you get beyond that point, you then have to decide, is this aggravated murder or is this murder? Is this aggravated murder or is this murder? The prosecutor touched upon this in his closing argument. The judge gave you the jury instructions yesterday. Look at those definitions closely. The difference between aggravated murder and murder is prior calculation and design. That's the phrase. That's the legal phrase. You have the definition in the instructions. Look at it carefully. Is this aggravated murder or is it murder? And as the judge instructed you yesterday, if you decide beyond a reasonable doubt it's aggravated murder and Mr. Sowell is the one, then there are other things you have to go through on the jury instructions, on the jury forms, other findings you have to make. If it's not aggravated murder, then you don't have to necessarily make those findings. Follow the instructions the judge gave you. Look at them carefully in the jury room.